Ever since the premiere of HBO's House of the Dragon, a prequel to the iconic Game of Thrones, the fans cannot stop raving about the show, despite its predecessor ending on a rather terrible note. With the premiere raking in about 10 million views, it looks like all is forgotten and people are ready to return back to Westeros once again. This time, 200 years before the events of the main show take place. An origin story like no other, House of the Dragon traces the history of the Targaryen clan and promises to answer some of the burning questions that we're left with when Game of Thrones ended. So, does House of the Dragon have the potential to be as great, if not more, as Game of Thrones once was? And what does it take to bring the show to that level? Stay tuned till the end of this video to find out what goes on behind the scenes of House of the Dragon. How is House of the Dragon different? When the prequel to one of the greatest shows in the world was first announced, people were a little skeptical about the whole thing. And with the Game of Thrones finale being such a massive disappointment, it was a pretty bold move to take the universe forward and take us back 200 centuries where we can trace the origins of Westeros as we knew it in the original show. However, while Game of Thrones is about the power struggle that ensues within the Seven Kingdoms as they all attempt to win the claim to the Iron Throne, House of the Dragon presents a very different story. Taking us back to the roots of the Targaryen household with Aegon the Conqueror laying down the foundations of his kingdom called Westeros, the show features a familiar setting and similar themes such as succession and power that were central to the main show. However, where it's different is the fact that it's a lot more character-driven than the original show. For those of you who have followed Game of Thrones, you would know that the story of the show stays loyal to no one. So while we follow Ned Stark's journey throughout the first season, in the finale, our hero dies a gruesome death, shifting the story completely. So in the original show, the story wasn't dependent on the characters. Instead, it was the characters who were revolving around the story. But House of the Dragon turns that concept on its head and gives us some of the most complex characters in TV history. From Rhaenyra to her evil uncle and possibly lover, Daemon, House of the Dragon takes us through the history of the Targaryen house, diving deep into their psyche one generation after the other. What's the timeline? The real reason why Game of Thrones went downhill with its final 2 seasons was the fact that George R.R. Martin just hadn't written anything after the 6th Song of Ice and Fire book, which was the original source material for the show. So, while the first 6 seasons were uniform and consistent in their storytelling, for the last 2 seasons, the showrunners had to make the story move forward on their own. This is why the entire thing went haywire and the fans just couldn't understand what had happened. But hopefully, with House of the Dragon, we might not have to go down that route again since the show is based on the Fire and Blood series by the same author. But this time around, the series has only 2 volumes out of which one has been completed, giving the showrunners plenty of material to work with. And hopefully, by the time that's done, Martin will have Volume 2 ready, or at least we hope that's the case. The seal of approval. Speaking of Martin, the author actually had the privilege to watch the rough cut of the coveted pilot episode back in December of 2021, and since then, the author has not stopped gushing about how powerful the show is. Expressing his opinions about House of the Dragon, Martin spoke about how many fans will be familiar with the names and characters introduced to us in the prequel simply because they had been mentioned so much in the original show. House of the Dragon is all set to be the origin story to end all origin stories, and according to the author, the fans are going to fall in love with a lot of characters on the show. But sadly, they are going to have to be ready for their hearts to be broken since we are in the Game of Thrones universe after all. The Targaryens are in good hands. I don't think you'll be disappointed, wrote Martin on his blog, commending the showrunners for their brilliant work. And well, let's just say that the premiere of the show proved that the author was right all along. As the story moves forward, we have tons of dragons, battles, and conflicts in store, pretty similar to the source material. In fact, with the second episode of the show now airing, Martin went on to say that the show had actually done a better job than his books all the time, referring to the portrayal of King Viserys to be specific. I am vastly impressed by the show's version of King Viserys, played by Paddy Considine, who gives the character a tragic majesty that my book, Viserys, never quite achieved, said Martin. What are the timelines? And while we are getting into the technicalities of the show, what we do know about its timeline is that House of the Dragon will cover about 3 decades of the history of Westeros. But how is that possible in the scope of the show? 2 words: time jumps. Now, while Game of Thrones didn't really have a lot of significant time jumps, House of the Dragon has already made use of it as a storytelling tool right from the first episode. Rumor has it that after the time jump between the first and second episodes, the third episode will feature yet another skip and take us further in history. According to the author, the timeline where the show picks up is one where Westeros is going through a turbulent time. Of course, right at the forefront of it all, we have the issue of who is going to succeed the Iron Throne, along with the possibility of a civil war breaking out in the Targaryen house. The show starts somewhere around 101 AC as King Viserys is met with the dilemma of having to choose a successor to his kingdom. The war is reportedly supposed to break out in 129, and according to sources, the first season will feature it. This means that the entirety of the first season will have to span across 28 years in terms of the story, and, well, with so many different actors cast to play the same role, It seems like these multiple time jumps are a highly likely possibility. Now, according to Martin, Season 1 won't actually cover the war, but it will cover all the big and little events that lead up to it, and once we get to Season 2, that's when the bloodshed will happen. How the magic happens. With the ratings of the show going sky high after the premiere of its second season, the fans are now more starved for content than ever before. So it's a good thing that a month before the show went on air, HBO started releasing small behind-the-scenes featurette videos showing us exactly what went into the making of this much-awaited prequel. From CGI dragons to massive sets, elaborate costumes, and stunts, there's a lot that goes into making every single episode of the show. Before the show went on air, Martin was pretty nervous to hand over his material to director Miguel Sapochnik and writer Ryan Condal. However, the two took responsibility head-on and used multiple techniques to bring this insane story to life. For example, while the dragons in the show are CGI, the director makes sure that the actors' reactions are authentic and raw. So he went ahead and got a movable model of a dragon's head that the actors could respond to while doing their scenes. Not just that, but the actual wind is blown onto the sets whenever they're shooting a scene with the dragons just to capture real human emotion and reactions. From the deadly-looking sword fights to the wigs, props, and just about everything else that ties into the look and the feel of the show, this is a project that the showrunners have put their heart and soul into, and well, it shows. And while it's pretty normal for shows and movies to not have elaborate sets anymore because of movie magic and the power of green screens, House of the Dragon has gone down the traditional path, and entire sets have been built to give the story a raw visual appeal. Now, we're not saying that the show hasn't used any special effects, but some sets, such as the King's Landing, were built from the ground up to give the actors a world to transport into as they play their characters. The cast and crew would shoot for 8 hours a day for several months just to get that one perfect shot. But in the end, it seems like all of the efforts paid off because the fans can't help but marvel at how brilliant the show has come together visually. A twist in the tale. So all of this said, it sounds like the show is on its way to the top of every much-watch list, right? But it looks like the success streak might be threatened by a big change that the show is going through at the moment. After the show has made history for being perhaps the biggest premiere any show has ever had in a long time, House of the Dragon was immediately renewed for a second season. And with director and co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik being in charge of the whole thing, the fans were pretty excited to see how he would take the show forward, especially considering that the man has directed some pretty well-performing episodes of the main show as well. But sadly, looks like the fans are in for a disappointment, since Sapochnik recently made the shocking announcement of his departure from the show. After serving as a co-runner for the show's first season alongside Ryan Condal, the director just doesn't have it in him to take it forward. According to Sapochnik, he has given 3 years of his life to House of the Dragon, working on development and production, and while he is still on the board as an executive producer of the show, he thinks that his work and direction has to come to a close. But the show must go on, and House of the Dragon has already hired another veteran from the main show, Alan Taylor, to come on board for Season 2 as a director for multiple episodes. As far as Sapochnik goes, he's talked about what an honor it has been for him to tell the story of House of the Dragon with the show's amazing cast and crew, and while the man is moving on professionally, he has full faith in Alan Taylor's abilities. And according to Taylor himself, the director is excited to dive back into the world of Game of Thrones, this time with the Targaryens taking center stage and becoming the main part of the story. Returning to Westeros will be a huge undertaking, and I am looking forward to the challenge, says Alan. And well, let's just say that the director has a lot to build on since Miguel has given the show a signature look. Alan will now have the responsibility of carrying down season after season. And that's a wrap for today's video. What are your thoughts on the House of the Dragon's behind the scenes? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.